Since there has been a Thanksgiving holiday just 3 days ago, I thought it would be a good topic for the first talk of this on period to talk about or look into this whole matter of gratitude. Before we start with this, since this is a new beginning, let's have some new words again about listening to a talk. Coming here just to hear some ideas or opinions confirmed. Is that what you're coming for? Or if they're not confirmed, to disagree then? Or can one, for the duration of the talk, suspend opinions and ideas, conventional ideas and prejudices, and just there be this openness of attending? We're not offering new ideas, but a way of working together, of seeing something through together, or thinking something through together. And unless there is this kind of working going on, one will just add to one's vocabulary or ideas, because words one hears are immediately made into ideas unless it is seen what they stand for, what they're pointing at. So this listening is, as it were, twofold to what is being said and to what goes on within oneself. They're not two things. If one can't see, then still something may continue questioning, bothering one, and one will continue looking in the light of what one has already started to look at, to think about, to question. Sometimes people tell me after a talk, maybe they haven't been there themselves, but they've heard that TP says such and such is so and so, and what you say affects other people in such and such a way. If you rather said that, it wouldn't affect them in this way. I sometimes get letters advising what rather to encourage and rather to discourage. So, what is being said today is not something for or against gratitude or ingratitude. It is examining this whole matter of gratitude beyond the conventional level in which we usually live, which is a relatively comfortable level because we don't have to think about what we're doing, we don't have to look at it and question it. So, gratitude, what is gratitude if one doesn't just have a feeling, tag it, label it, and then live in this world of tags and labels? One must really see how it operates, see how one talks about it, how other people talk about it, whether one really has that feeling and what it is. If there is no label, no obligation, no compulsion behind it, or to see that obligation and compulsion behind it. The motives one has, how it arises, what one expects from it, the whole thing. Not according to what I'm saying here, but how it is actually in oneself and in one's relationship with one's friends and colleagues, parents, whoever, children. Three days ago, many people had what in this country is called a Thanksgiving meal. As we heard over the news, there were people who didn't have one, but most people did have one. We ourselves shared it with some friends who had invited us, and the table was just loaded with food. Before starting to eat, there was a slight argument who would say grace. Nobody really wanted to do it, and then finally the mother ended all arguments by saying it. It didn't seem to be a moment of reflection, so to say, but something to get over with, to get on with the main thing of the day. It appeared to be a very mechanical, rote-like affair. Originally we weren't there, but we're told in history that the pilgrims, people who came here to settle in a new country, had an abundant harvest, and out of thanks prepared this meal, or prepared the meals and gave thanks for the meal and for the good harvest. Thanks to whom? In their belief, there was a God who had sort of been involved in bringing about this good harvest, and one thanked him for it. What if the harvest had been poor? Would one have thought, I didn't behave too well, therefore something was withheld from me by God? And here where the harvest is plentiful, I must have done all right? Because I got this, or we got this. Horn of plenty. So, very easily, one conceives God as the giver of punishment and reward. And the gratitude is for the reward, and maybe also to allay possible further punishments. Because one conceives God in one's own image, oneself has been raised by reward and punishment. One has been told that a God, not just in Christianity and other religions, expects that, and is not pleased when there is no gratitude coming forth. In ancient times, there were burnt offerings to the gods. Burnt so that the smoke would rise and the gods could partake via this smoke of the meat or whatever was burnt. Sometimes it was human sacrifice. And later on, just burning incense. To please the gods who may otherwise not continue with their giving and benefaction. If one sits with a good meal, one can reflect upon this and feel grateful that one has all this food. But can one also look beyond this gratefulness for what oneself and one's immediate family or friends or neighborhood receives? Is there the same feeling of gratitude when one reflects upon more than half of the population who doesn't have enough to eat, maybe not more than one meal, and that being insufficient? Is it possible to feel gratitude for one's meal in the face of that? And one is that too. We are all humankind. Not just right now the ones who have the food. So is gratitude a more limited thing for what I have or we have received? Hoping that it will be continuing? Actually, you may feel this is getting so heavy right from the start. One says thank you when one receives something, when one is happy about a gift, happy for something somebody has done for one, you say thank you. And it can be no more of that, a friendly, kind, warm communication with someone who has met one in the same spirit. So this can be said and uttered, and that's it. That's the end of it. Doesn't need to be celebrated from then on, year after year. Continued. Actually, times one is overflowing with a sense of good feeling. And when we want to express that, certain spontaneity about it, but is the way we express it spontaneous? We have been channeled in this since we've grown up as little children. We were admonished time and time again to say thank you. We receive a lollipop at the checkout counter of the supermarket, and I've seen many mothers who told the girl to withhold this lollipop until the child said thank you, and some children just couldn't do it. There was rebellion, so they didn't get that lollipop. Some children respond well to this prodding. They sense the need of the parent, and they conform to the need of the parent for the sake of the parent. There's this real sensitivity already in little children to do what the parent demands for the good humor sake of the parent. So they say thank you quite easily, and the whole matter is easy for them. Parent is pleased. And then there are children who can't do this, and there's struggle and contention and rebellion. And even as adults, it's very difficult for them to say thank you, because it's such a thing has been made out of it. One person brought this up once in, I think it was a workshop, wondering whether I was advocating no standards by which to bring up children. She referred just to an event that had taken place at the house. The grandfather, if I remember correctly, had come over and taken hours to put together a swing set for the little daughter, or granddaughter. I think she was 3 years old or 2. And the mother was a little bit exasperated, or maybe this is exaggerated. She wanted this child to say thank you to the grandfather, and somehow or other this didn't come forth. And the question was, what do I do in a case like this? Don't I have to bring this child up in the proper way to say thank you? We talked about this, about the fact that this child, observing the grandfather do this, probably felt what good time he had doing it. Children don't think in terms of things being done for them. They take this really for granted. Anything that the adult does, unless there's heaviness about it and anger, seems to be enjoyable to the adult. That's why the child wants to get the hands into the dishpan too. Wants to do everything the parent does. Looks like so much fun. And then one has to hear what I'm doing for you, all the things I'm doing for you, and you're not grateful for it. To put oneself into the position of the child, and at a moment like this, at a moment of exasperation, why don't you say thank you after all he did? Maybe if one sees it from 2 feet high, or whatever the size is, one understands. Doesn't mean that one can't say thank you. Thank you, father or grandpa, and maybe the child will imitate it like anything. If we ourselves say it all the time, the child will do so too without prodding, because children want to do everything that adults do. And a tremendous power of imitation. Actually, it's not only children who take things for granted ourselves. Do we rush out to the garbage men when they're there in the snow and ice, piling up this garbage into the truck? Oh no, that's his job. I've paid my taxes for it. To say thank you to a garbage man, they really appreciate it. Or to the postman. And sometimes people don't want thanks. They want to do this thing and not be bothered by thanks. I remember once being stuck, coming from Rochester, being stuck on the thruway with a flat tire. Was really lousy weather. Cold and rainy, sleety. And of course I didn't know where to put that, how do you call that thing, the jack? Was supposed to be a special hole in the Saab or whatever foreign car it was, and my husband had showed me many times, but I'd forgotten. So some people stopped and they didn't know it either, so we fumbled around, and then a huge trailer truck stopped by, made enormous gust of slashing rain and stuff, just pulled in, and a bald-headed huge man got out. And just sort of pushed us aside, put this thing in, changed the tire. And I fumbled around for some money. I had $2 in my purse, and I offered it to him. He just waved it away, got in his truck, and drove off. It was just beautiful. Somehow or other he saw what was going on there, and did it, and the hell with thanks for this. So is it possible, as one is in these situations, to look very dispassionately? Why is one saying it? Is there a motive? Does one expect something? Or does it just come up and it's finished? Or does one express gratitude to be fulfilling sort of an image of oneself as a grateful person? And in this image covering up all the bitterness that is there. Bitterness or anger or disappointment. And it then better to face that and then to establish the facade of a grateful person. Some people are very good at giving thanks. We've talked about this already from childhood on. Maybe they know how it feels to be thanked. Very often, we will do things in order to elicit gratitude. Because somebody thanking us, somebody appreciating us, gives us a sense of worth. It makes our existence somewhat meaningful. It seems so utterly unmeaningful most of the time. So if I do something for somebody and this person appreciates me, then again I don't have to face this total lack of meaning in my life and the ache that goes with it. The appreciation from someone else will sort of wash over it. This can become a real addiction, a dependency, with all the dangers that go with that, because many people are not appreciative. They do take for granted. They are so wrapped up in their own problems, they don't realize that someone has done something for them. So many wives or husbands complain about the lack of appreciation of their wife or husband, or children, or parents. And one is forever hurt, lives in this agony of not being appreciated, and yet feeling the compulsion to do, because one wants it, one wants to elicit it. You see what a conflict one creates for oneself if one does something in order to be thanked for. Yet it is so difficult to do something and not expect anything in return. It's tremendously difficult, because we're so conditioned to say thank you and to expect thank you. And to use this, to exploit it, so we don't have to face our own inner emptiness, the misery of it. So can there be a tension when this comes up, this expectation of gratitude, and when it doesn't come forth? And then the hurt, can it be faced immediately? So immediately that it does not take root, doesn't grow roots all over the mind, which keep festering and nagging. Sometimes nagging one and doing more, in doing more for this person. Which becomes really a burden for that person, to be showered with things for which one is expected to show appreciation and one doesn't appreciate it. And just to say a pretended thank you, what good is it? It's agony for the receiver and for the giver. Please, to bear in mind, I'm not saying don't say thank you. Actually, it's very nice to be thanked. For one thing, it can give one feedback that what one is doing is falling into the right slot. But then can it be finished, whether it's coming or not coming, to be done with it? Always to have a clean slate. Clean slate. When we used to write in school, in grammar school, we still wrote with chalk on little slates that we brought to school, and then always wipe. We could always use the same slate over and over again, because it could always be wiped clean. So far, we were talking about sort of personal, more personal gratitude for things one has personally had done for one or has personally received or given. Then there's this whole matter of institutionalized gratitude, which is very strong, particularly in totalitarian states. Institutionalized gratitude. Totalitarian states, you have the huge pictures of the founder and his successors posted all over to constantly remind you to pay respect and gratitude. Growing up in Hitler Germany, we were imbued day in and day out in school to be thankful for what Hitler had done for us and was doing for us, and constantly reminding us of how things were before. It's another aspect of gratitude. It very often, it has this very strong element of comparison in it. I compare the good harvest with the bad harvest. If there was no bad harvest or no comparison, there would be just that. And one would be just with it. But comparison comes up, and either one feels lucky or superior, fortunate, and gives one a boost of energy, or the opposite takes place when one needs to compare oneself with who is better off, and then bitterness, resentment, and anger, and cynicism grow in the mind. So this gratitude that is institutionalized, in that there's a demand for it, a demand for commitment. It's really used. It's used for perpetuating the state, perpetuating the leaders of the state. Again, to deflect dissatisfaction and instead arouse feelings of gratitude so one doesn't see what's actually going on. Sort of keeping the people in a state of counting one's blessings. This is a totally compulsive thing, and yet if large numbers of people do it together, it arouses a tremendous group feeling, and one begins to convince oneself that one really owes gratitude and has been given a lot of advantages and blessings and whatnot. Always being reminded to be grateful for what you have. Look at those who don't have. Remember in this diary of Anne Frank, living in this attic in Holland for years in incredibly miserable circumstances of this small family living there together all the time, and Anna writing how her mother admonished the children to think how much worse off other people were and to feel grateful. And she said, it does not work. It does not give me any kind of pleasure or good feeling to think how much worse other people live. There's a real honest perception there. Organized religions, religious systems work with gratitude in gross and subtle ways. A person leaves a religious organization. This is interpreted, very often labeled as an act of ingratitude toward the founders and the followers and the teaching and whatever. Still, every once in a while, I get a letter. Poor person, even though feeling it's a wonderful thing, it's been happening here, but isn't there gratitude owed to the Buddhas or whoever? And don't we have to express this gratitude? What is gratitude? One needs to look at this again and again. Not just say I have it or must arouse it or put myself into a situation where others help me arouse it. Is it a feeling of great love welling up that one that then labels gratitude? Because one has heard that this feeling comes up and must come up. If it doesn't come up, you're not working right. And one has already been told how to channel it, toward whom, and what the benefits will bring in the long run. In many religious systems, there's the teaching that through gratitude one establishes a personal relationship with God, Jehovah, Buddha, Christ. I don't know about Muslims, whether there's this personal relationship too. For the sake of what? For one's own advancement, development, enlightenment, salvation, liberation, going to heaven? If this is a teaching, one will cultivate this. And then the gratitude or the ceremony of gratitude and reverence becomes much more important. It assumes tremendous significance, and one doesn't see what lies underneath all the misery, the conflicts, the antagonism with each other, the lack of love in relationship within oneself. That doesn't get looked at and seen into and seen through completely. Actually, again, we started in the beginning to say when one thanks for a meal, it is a rather personal affair. The meal of me, that I am consuming, my family, the friends I'm with, we're grateful for it. And one doesn't look any farther. The same with these personal thanks one gives, the personal gratitude, and this wanting of a personal relationship. What is personal about oneself? One's agonies, one's fears, one's hopes, this wanting to attain something, to get something and achieve something is universal in all human beings. And it has to be seen, it has to be looked into and questioned whether it can come to an end, whether there can be freedom from it. It is this constant working of me, my advantage, my developing, my enlightenment, my liberation. And this very my and me is the thing that stands in the way. It must be seen. It must be discovered and detected as it arises. And at a moment of seeing, is there any me that judges, that comes down heavy on it? On oneself? I shouldn't be this way. It happens so quickly. One doesn't even want to look. One rather engages in a ceremony. And yet when the ceremony is over, one is back to one's difficulties in relating, one's conflicts, inner pains, pain of loss, fear of loss. Can one be with that completely and not look for any escape? Because there is none. This thing is there. It wants to be seen. It wants to be looked through. Actually, to think of a God or a Savior or Buddha as a giver is a totally false concept. When there is no me, when there is this state of mind in which there's wholeness, no division, no antagonism, no opposition whatsoever, then there is a welling up of love, and that asks for nothing. It wants nothing in return. Because there is no me in you, there is no division. There's a sharing of something that does not belong to one, so how could one give it? And if it doesn't belong to anyone, how could one receive it? So there is no giving and no receiving. Does that make sense? As long as we calculate or count on getting something back, we're living in this confining cell of the me, with all its disappointments and fears. How to open up the doors and the windows, break down the walls? Can it happen in attention of this whole ongoing process? To really see what's happening in oneself when one thinks of gratitude, thinks one ought to be grateful and one cannot be, or one pretends to be. Can it be looked at very freely, without any fear? Because there's no threat. There's no threat anywhere except what one imagines to be. One is absolutely free to look. Every human being is. To look, to investigate, to question, to listen, to find out what's going on in oneself, as is, from moment to moment. So is it humanly possible to completely freely give and completely freely receive? Without any attachment. Attachment to what one is giving, to what is received. What is received? Well, a gift, all right. A vase or a book, a turkey. People give thanks for that. then it's finished. Not expect thanks. Not expect another gift. If it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. One freely lives. There's a koan in one of the books in which a monk asks a Zen teacher, what's the most wonderful or most precious thing? And this man answers, sitting alone on top of a very high mountain. And at this reply, the monk bows, and the teacher hits him. All one act. What's the most precious thing in this whole world? Sitting alone on top of a very high mountain. The bow and the hit. What does it mean to sit alone on top of a very high mountain? It could mean, if one doesn't look into it too carefully, isolation, getting away from it all, out of the city, away from relationships that are difficult, away from the family or from the community, getting oneself established in a beautiful mountain place, looking over the valleys. That's not what this means. Sitting alone, the word alone means all one. No separation. Not away from anyone, because there is no away. There's no distance. There's no place to go, no place to hide, no place to escape. And yet alone, meaning not dependent on all of one's conventional thoughts, conditionings, ideas, dependent on relationship, which means attached to relationship, attached to people, not being able to live without them, being crushed, annihilated when one is left by a person. Sitting alone does not mean to leave people, but not to be dependent upon them. Which doesn't mean you're not dependent on the garbage man or the postman. Not to cling for one's own gratification and fulfillment and happiness. Which means to face the fear of loneliness, which does not have to be away from people. It happens right in the midst of the crowd that one feels alone, doesn't it? Right in the midst of relationship, one feels alone. Because most of the time there is no relationship, there is no mutual care and deep understanding of each other on a profound level. So this sitting alone on top of a high mountain. Have you ever been on top of a high mountain? Maybe a low mountain, where wherever one looks, because it must be a good day, there is a free, clear view. Everything is revealed no matter which way one turns. 360 degrees and up and down. It's all there. It's all clear. Not clouded, not confused, because there's no attachment. Or attachment is seen clearly. Fear is faced directly. Trying to drown it out by going to a football game. feel it, to be in touch with it. So that one isn't compelled and driven by it into all kinds of crazy escapes, which are hurtful and harmful to oneself and everyone else. So sitting alone on top of a high mountain, in touch with everything, clearly seeing what is going on inside and out, they're not two. What goes on inside me, my wants, my desires, bitterness, frustration, it goes on in you and you and you and everyone. We're not separate from each other in all of these fundamental stirrings of the human mind. So seeing it clearly in myself, I see it clearly in everyone. And can there be freedom from it in this seeing, which has no element, not the shadow of condemnation in it, and not a shadow of acceptance in it either. No shadow, just seeing it. Can you do that? Is that possible? Sitting alone on top of a high mountain. It is nothing about it like aloofness. Just meaning not being ruled by one's whole background. To see the background. If you see your background, if it comes into view, into clear view, it doesn't rule you at that moment. If you condemn it, then you're ruled by the condemnation. And the view is distorted, is clouded. So as the teacher says this, sitting alone on top of a very high mountain is the most wonderful thing. There comes the bow, and there comes the hit. Do we bow to this? Give gratitude for it? Pay reverence to it? Then it's you and me. This thing and me. As a division, a chasm, which I have to bridge with a bow. Or with a gift. But it will not bridge, the chasm remains. Maybe the monk bowed, we don't know. Maybe the monk bowed to test the teacher, to see whether he felt flattered by that bow. Felt pretty good that here was a bow coming. So that's what we're trying to point out earlier. In giving thanks and in receiving thanks, to stay cool, to cool it. Not to be carried away by someone flattering one or showing one great deference. It's so tempting, because we always want to latch on to being somebody, in somebody's eyes, if we can't be it in our own eyes. But somebody seems, I'm somebody, so that gives me a little zest to live, at least for this day. Rather face the inadequacy, the pain of it, the torture of it, face it, and plummet. It's the me. Beyond the me, there is no such thing. When there is no me, there is no inadequacy. There's only a broad view as from the top of a high mountain, where everything is revealed without condemnation, because that's the me. If there's this clarity of seeing, is there any thought of indebtedness? Find out. Or is that a thought that comes in later? And as soon as a thought comes, we're stirred. Or can it be seen? That there is no indebtedness to anyone except people who you've lent money. You're indebted to them to pay it back. But only you yourself can see. No one can do it for you. No one can do it for you. No God, no Buddha, no Savior, no one. If they could do it, they would have long done it. Things can only be pointed at, pointed out, put into words, but the words aren't the real thing. And when things are put into words and pointed out, it's not done so that you give that person gratitude. It's not done for that. I don't know what it's done for. Not in order to. It's just done. And when someone wakes up and sees, then one sees there's nothing. There's no thing that belongs to one or that belongs to the other person. It's just there. To be seen and touched and lived in. Lived with everyone else, who is no other than oneself. We'll end here for today.